video may well be slightly shorter than my usual videos because I'm only looking at 2 or 3 audios in this video. But my focus here is some comments that were made by Chris Stern, which I keep thinking about them and they keep bugging me. Because to me, perhaps they are just innocent comments, but the wordage used in those comments just really bugs me, and it makes me wonder if he did know something about what his son did, particularly given that we now know that the decision to go to Orlando had nothing to do with him paying for a hotel room for Jen and Stefan, because they already paid for themselves. So for some reason, he needed to go there in the middle of the night, but not to pay for a hotel room for them. And not even to pay for a hotel room for the dog, because he states quite clearly that he reimbursed them for the hotel room, for the cost of having the dog in the hotel. Meaning that when he arrived, they had paid for their own hotel room, they had paid for the dog. So why did he need to get there at 2 o'clock in the morning? Why couldn't he just get there the following morning if the need was for him to just be there for moral support? So there was some reason for him to have gone there so desperately in the middle of the night. Now, I have mentioned this in a few of my videos. I believe it has got some connection with Stefan heading down to Northport, because you have Chris Stearns arriving, and then you're getting different accounts. Some accounts are that they all said hello, checked in, went to bed. You've got other accounts where they were up talking for some time. So none of their accounts seem to match. And then apparently after they all went to bed, you've got Stefan Stearns heading down to Northport. You've got police dash cam showing him less than a mile from the house. You have a statement made by Chris Stearns at a later date, which makes it clear that Stefan Stearns had to have gone into the house, because Chris Stearns has said quite clearly that Stefan Stearns had been on the computer, on his own computer, prior to heading to Kissimmee on the Sunday. But then he talks about there being no hard drive in that computer, meaning that Stefan must have removed it. So the only possibility there is that either Stefan did get into the house that morning, that Monday morning or whatever it was, Wednesday morning, or that Chris Stearns removed the hard drive and destroyed it. So with these things in mind, when I listen to these statements made by Chris Stearns, it just makes me even more suspicious of him. Now, I'm not thinking that the guy was a police officer for 2 years apparently. But we also know that these parents thoroughly enabled their son. There's rumours of them paying someone off in the past for something that Stefan did. We know that Stefan avoided charges sometime in the past for some assault with a knife. So we know that they have actually stepped up in the past to try and get him out of trouble. Would they step up if they knew that he had unalived Maddie? Maybe, maybe not. Is it likely that Stefan lied to him and gave him a watered down version of his own involvement? Quite likely. And I think that's what may have occurred here. Stefan Stearns, I believe, has contacted his parents and said, Maddie's missing, they're going to look at me because of something, and who knows what he would have said, but it seems to me that that's probably what's happened, and Chris Stearns has jumped into action. After that, I'm not sure if Chris Stearns would have been stupid enough to jump into action had he believed that his son had actually unalived Maddie. But who knows? So let's jump in and listen to this audio, and I'll just discuss it as we go along.
Trying to think when I had the conversation about his phone. He, so I said, okay, well, they're going to want to know where your whereabouts were because you're the last person that saw her, so they're going to want to know. I said, did you have your phone with you? No. Why would you have your phone? I just forgot. Forgot mine. I said, beautiful.
Now, context first. This conversation that he's relaying occurred before there was any arrests with Stefan Stearns, before there was any suggestion that Stefan might have been considered a suspect. This basically was a conversation really early on in the piece. So, for starters, him asking Stefan, they're going to want to know where you were from your phone, immediately suggests that there is some thought of Stefan being guilty of something. Now, if someone has a missing child and they bring their parents to say, you know, my girlfriend's child is missing, I'm really worried, is it normal to ask or to say, well, they're going to want to look at your phone to find out where you are? Because to me that sounds like he's straight up saying that, well, you're going to look guilty, you know, they're going to want to know where your phone was for an alibi. It just seems like, to me, a conversation that you would have with someone that had either just admitted to something or that you believed was guilty. But then the conversation continues, and when Stefan says, oh, I forgot it, I left it at home, Chris Stearns' reaction is, beautiful. Now, that to me was a major red flag from the moment I heard it. For starters, like I said, why was he questioning if Stearns has his phone with him in the first place? If he had simply rung him to say Maddie's missing? Because it seems like the conversation has immediately gone to Stefan's guilt. Why was that? Was it just that his dad believed that he was capable of doing something wrong? Did Stearns tell him that something had happened and Chris Stearns was quickly trying to do damage control? But to hear him say beautiful, that's not the reaction you would expect. Beautiful has positive connotations. Beautiful, well done, good work. They're the sort of things that go hand in hand. Not beautiful as in, well, heck, you've screwed up and you're going to be in trouble now because they're going to want to know why you didn't take your phone. But no, it's just beautiful. So to me, that's one of the first things that raised a red flag with me with Chris Stearns. The fact that he needed to have this conversation in the first place, before his son was even considered a suspect by law enforcement. He's having this conversation, well, they're going to want to look at your phone to see where you were. And then him saying beautiful in relation to Stefan Stearns having left his phone at home. I would have expected, especially when you listen to the way that Chris Stearns talks about his son, and at a later date he talks about having read his son the riot act simply for apparently not being at the hotel that morning. So apparently in Chris Stearns' mind, that is worse than Stephen Stearns not actually having his mobile phone with him at the time that Maddie went missing. It doesn't add up to me. So this is a concern, particularly when you pair it with the conversations that were had over the computer. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit there. So let's listen to more of the conversations that was had between Chris Stearns and the officer regarding the phone.
So then he tells me that he did an OS update. Now, I'm a techie guy, and I said, okay, and he said to wipe the phone out. Really? How does that happen? It's an OS update. It's automatic. You say yes, and that's it. It updates, and then it reboots. It doesn't reset. It reboots. Well, I was multitasking, and I hit a wrong button, and it reset. And I questioned that, and I said, so there were some inconsistencies there. So why would that phone be wiped out? And I asked him last night, when you guys wanted the phone, I said, is there any reason why you wouldn't want to give them the phone? No, I don't think so. I said, okay, give them the phone.
Yeah.
So again, there's a few things here that concerned me. When Stephen Stearns relays to him that he basically reset his phone, his reaction is, really? And he raises his voice. That was not a, well, you're a bloody moron kind of reaction. That was more of a, really? Well done kind of reaction. Just from his tone of voice, to me, it didn't sound like he was being judgmental there. And when he's relaying this whole thing to the officers, you don't get this same response that you did over him not being at the hotel. I read him the riot act. He just goes on and explains to the officers how it's not something that's easy to reset a phone, and that, that was a bit of a concern to him. But does he sound concerned at the time when he's relaying it to the officers? No, he really doesn't. So that to me is interesting. It just may be that that's just the flow of his narrative, and that perhaps he's just caught in the flow of the narrative, so he's not relaying what he was really thinking at the time. But then when he's talking about Stephen Stearns ringing him and saying they want my phone or something like that, and he's like, well, is there any reason why you shouldn't give it to them? Give it to them. And he's saying this after his son has reset his phone. So, I don't know. To me, what he's relaying here to the officers is a little bit interesting. It could just be someone who is a former law enforcement officer, although, 2 years, that's not a huge amount of time. It could just be he's just trying to follow the rules, but he really doesn't sound like he's angry with his son at this point in time. He sounds like he's just completely brushed off the factory reset. He says, well, why would you do that? Not, read him the riot act, well, now you're going to look guilty. And then he's like, well, if, give them your phone. Was he expecting, he says he's techie, but was he expecting that because the phone was reset, that they wouldn't find anything on there? I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching here, but there's just something about this phone conversation, the way he spends a lot of time explaining how the reset works, but he's offering no judgment here, considering all the other times that he offers judgment over his son's actions. And yet when it comes to the reset, He's not offering any judgment here with the officers. He's not showing any concern over his son handing over the phone. There's still no judgment here. None of the... And it's not, well, you have to hand over your phone, you have to do it. It's more a case of, are they going to find anything on your phone? Oh, well and good, since they're not going to find anything on your phone, then yeah, hand it over. So that was the other thing there. Him not immediately saying, well, you have to hand your phone over, that's just, part of the investigation. No, he needed to check first that there wouldn't be anything on the phone if his son handed it over. Now, with this conversation, he is moving at a rate of knots with the way he is talking. So he goes from one part of the talking about the phone, he left his phone at home, oh, he did a reset of the phone, and oh, gee, then I checked with him when he said he had to hand it to police. He said there was no reason why he shouldn't hand it to police, so I said, well, go for it. And then, straight up, he fires a question at the law enforcement officer. Now listen to the question and listen to the response.
So, I don't know. Is there something on the phone?
Has he ever suffered from like mental illness or anything?
So he's given this really, really long explanation relating to the phone, and then just wham. Is there anything on the phone? He wants to find out if they've found anything on the phone. Now, surely, as a parent, if you thought that your child was completely innocent, why would you need to ask, is there anything on the phone? So that to me was significant too. He shouldn't be concerned about the phone. It should just be, he said they want my phone. I said, well, you have to give it to them. Not he said they want my phone. Well, I checked if there was going to be anything on that phone first before I told him to hand it in, and then turning around and saying, well, did you find anything on that phone? To me, he is either already believing that his son had something to do with this, and that is perhaps why he went to Kissimmee in the first place, or Stefan has told him something. To me, it just does not seem like a natural reaction for a parent to be saying these things and to be questioning, well, did you find anything on the phone? And the thing that I find significant, which makes me think that the officer that he was speaking to also perhaps saw red flags in this conversation, he didn't even answer the question. He simply steered the conversation in a different direction. Chris Stearns has asked him outright, did you find anything on the phone? Not even a case of, well, we can't discuss anything that might relate to the investigation. Nuh-uh, none of that. Straight up, it's just, does your son have a history of mental illness? So that is really telling to me. That tells me that it's just not my instincts here that are saying there's something wrong with this conversation that's going on, but that this officer also did not like the conversation that was going on, and that he wanted to head the conversation in a completely different direction. Straight up, he was not going to answer that question, and perhaps it did raise red flags for him. Like I said, this could just be completely innocent. It could just be maybe that's the way Chris Stearns talks. But to me, the fact that every other time he is so judgmental about his son. We hear these conversations about his son, and he is so judgmental. But in this instance, he's talking about the phone. He over explains, which to me, well, we know a lot of the time when someone over explains something, it's because they're trying to hide something. He over explains all this stuff about the phone. And he's not offering any judgment whatsoever in relation to his son's phone, other than beautiful, which is not what you would expect him to say. Now, just keeping that phone conversation in mind, I'm going to move on to the computer that was at their house, that was Stearns' computer. I'm going to play you the bit that I mentioned earlier, where he says quite clearly that his son was on that computer before he left. And I'll just reiterate that, and then I'll play what he said in another conversation.
But, I asked him, I said, hey, look, there's a desktop computer at home. Maybe you guys should come get it. He said, okay, we'll make arrangements to do that. Only to find out that the hard drive was removed from it. I know it was there Sunday morning when he left, because I told the police that after I found that out. So he purposely removed that hard drive.
So he says here quite clearly, I know it was there Sunday morning when he left. In other words, Stefan did not remove the hard drive at any time prior to the Sunday when he headed to Kissimmee. And this is not the only time that Chris Stearns has said this. He actually said in a police interview, I know that he was on that computer the Sunday morning before he left. Now that isn't quite as specific as saying I know the drive was in there when he left, but it is still saying that Stefan was using that computer just before he left. So either way, you have two conversations here where he is basically saying that supposedly the very last time that Stefan Stearns was in their house, the hard drive was in the computer. So that leaves two options. Now, I've done a video where I discuss what I believe, or discuss that I believe that Stefan definitely did go into the house and that Chris Stearns knew about it and that it had been planned, because you have the doorbell, the cameras being disconnected. Supposedly they had decided to change providers, and not only were the cameras turned off, but the modem was on the floor in his office. And coincidentally, which, and I will just point out here, Chris Stearns himself says, I don't believe in coincidences, but coincidentally, at the same time, the keypad wasn't working for the front door, meaning that supposedly the only way that he could get in would be if he had a clicker for the garage door. He's very careful to avoid mentioning the back door of the house. That is never ever mentioned. The closest it comes to it is he claims that the gates or the backyard to their property is gated. I've shown you in other videos what his version of gated is. There are side gates either side of his house which just have a very simple latch on it, which look like you couldn't even lock it, where you would just lift the latch and you could go around and get in the back door quite easily, I would imagine. Also, even if you were able to lock those side gates, he's mentioned that Stefan Stearns used to run track and everything. I could imagine Stefan Stearns quite easily managing to climb over the fences, particularly when you consider that on one side of the house you have there isn't a house, it's just all trees and quite thick as well. So Chris Stearns has been very careful to avoid mentioning the back door of their house in any interviews at any point in time. Now we have him saying that when his son left on the Sunday, the hard drive was in that computer, which leaves two possibilities regarding that hard drive. We know that the following day was when Stephen Stearns was arrested. So the only time that Stephen Stearns was back down at Northport was that trip that he made in the middle of the night in Jen's car. He had no further opportunities after that to return to Northport. So either he went down to Northport, he did get into the house, and he removed the hard drive. And Chris Stearns has somehow forgotten that that's the only possibility when he's actually talking about this hard drive. Otherwise, if Stephen Stearns didn't remove that hard drive, then Chris or Deb Stearns did remove it. Either way, Chris Stearns has knowledge of this hard drive. He has knowledge that his son got into the house. And that is very, very interesting to me, because he tries to give the impression that his son couldn't possibly have got into the house. So on one hand, he's telling law enforcement, no, he couldn't possibly have got into the house because the door pad was disabled, and coincidentally there was no cameras to show if he turned up at the house, but the keypad was disabled, so he couldn't possibly have gotten in. But he was using this computer just before he left on the Sunday, and I know that the hard drive was in there when he left, and now the hard drive's not in there, but he never got into the house. That is sus as, if you ask me. Now, with that in mind, and considering the conversation of the mobile phone, let's have a listen to conversation that he had with law enforcement over that hard drive.
Oh, this isn't the same hard drive?
No.
Oh,
Because if he was using it that morning,
yeah.
we would have been able to tell through the forensics number.
Right.
And no, it hasn't been used since, I guess, I want to say like 2020 maybe.
Okay, so it was an assumption on my part that that was the same hard drive. But I don't know how he put that hard drive in it, and I don't know how he put that in there. So he must have just destroyed the thing.
Right.
It would have made
Which we don't.
best sense to do that for sure, but too bad he wasn't smart enough about the phone. Not that I would be encouraging that,
Right.
but still.
So there's a few things that stand out to me here. First of all, in terms of the hard drive, he had been really pushing this narrative of finding a hard drive in the storage unit. And then it kind of takes the wind out of his sails when the law enforcement officer tells him, no, that's not the one from his computer because it hasn't been used since 2020. And he's still trying, it's taken the wind out of his sails to the extent that he's still trying to say, well, I don't know how he would have got it in there. So it hasn't even dawned on him yet that the officers aren't saying, that the officers are saying, that's not the one from the computer. He's still trying to go with the narrative of, well, I don't know how he put the hard drive in the storage unit. And then it must dawn on him what they've said, because he then suddenly realises what they've said, and he says, well, he must have destroyed the hard drive, and that makes best sense to do that for sure. Now, he has jumped straight away to he must have destroyed that hard drive, not to, I wonder if he's hidden it somewhere else, or what did he do with that hard drive, but straight up, he must have destroyed that hard drive. I found that interesting that he's made that jump, and I also find it interesting that it took him a while to recover from his story of, I found the hard drive hidden in the storage unit, here it is, and they're saying that's not the one. So, was he aware that Stefan had retrieved that hard drive, and did Stefan destroy it, and he knew that he had done? Was this all part of the plan? That perhaps Stefan went down to Northport to retrieve the hard drive, and that seems to definitely be what has occurred. And then there is some confusion over whether or not the storage unit was accessed. Now, I need to go over documents because I think that in the documents it does actually say the storage unit was accessed. So I think that law enforcement are actually being kind of vague with Chris Stearns over that. And to me, that says they don't trust him. They think there are connections between him and Stearns, him and his son, with regards to what happened. So, it makes me wonder, was it arranged for Stefan to make it look like he'd been to the storage unit? And did he either hide the hard drive in there and later Chris Stearns retrieved it and got rid of it? Because it seems really convenient that you have this trip down to Northport, and Chris Stearns has been very careful to make sure that it sounds that his son couldn't possibly have gotten into the house. But at the same time, he seems to be quite adamant to push this notion of his son probably getting into the storage unit. There's a lot of lies around that too, because at one point he talks about there being a key for the storage unit in a basket in the house, and then that part of the narrative gets lost completely and switches to there used to be a key but I haven't seen it for over a year. And I found it interesting that during the interview that the officers didn't respond to that either. So it makes me wonder what they were thinking about this guy at the same time. But there's so many inconsistencies here. And there's so many things with this story that just don't seem right. And then after him saying that he believed that his son must have destroyed the hard drive, he's like, too bad he didn't think to do that with the phone. Not that I would condone that. The things that he is coming out with don't align with the things that he's said in the past in terms of being super judgmental of his son. With other things where he's been discussing his son with law enforcement, things that don't relate directly to Maddie, he has been quite judgmental over them. He talks about him being a liar. He talks about him sitting around and doing nothing and stealing their watches, etc., etc. And anything that does not relate to Maddie's case, he expresses judgment over his son. And yet when it comes to talking about things like the missing hard drive or resetting the phone or forgetting to take the phone with him, he doesn't express that judgment. The only time we hear him express judgment relating to Maddie's case is when he talks about the flat tyre, and he's like, well, I thought that was suspicious. I'm like, well, heck, people get flat tyres, why is that suspicious? So that seemed out of place to me. And then also him saying I read him the riot act because he wasn't at the hotel that morning, and that he believed that had officers turned up and Stefan wasn't there, that they would have put a bolo out for him. Why would you think that? So there's a lot of things here. There's a major mismatch going on here for someone who believed his son was innocent and had nothing to do with the child being missing. So I think there is definitely something that we're missing here with regards to Chris Stearns. And there's something about it that just makes me feel really uncomfortable. Now I'm going to play one more piece of audio from Chris Stearns and listen carefully to what it is that he's saying, and then I'll explain why I played it and why it was a little bit concerning to me.
Unfortunately, I found out a couple days later, if I had seen that TV interview that they held the next day, my attitude and demeanor with him would have been considerably different than me making the trip to Orlando and helping he and Maddie out, or Jennifer out.
So essentially here he's saying that when he watched those interviews of Jen and Stefan, that they looked sus as. So had he seen them beforehand, he wouldn't have made the trip to Orlando to help Jen and Stefan out. What's the problem with that, you say? Because we had the story from Jen that he went down there to help them out by paying for the hotel. No. He's made it quite clear that he didn't pay for their hotel. He made it clear that they paid for the hotel, they paid for the dog, and he reimbursed them for the dog. At one point he's like he went there to give support, but here he specifically says to help them out. So what sort of help was he going up there to help them out to provide? He's not saying, I wouldn't have gone up there to offer support, I wouldn't have gone up there to help them out. He's essentially saying that had he realised that his son was in it up to the eyeballs, that he wouldn't have got involved. So what did he do? How did he help them out? Why is he so accepting regarding the phone and the hard drive? Why is he lying about his son actually getting into the house when he knows that his son got into the house? Or if his son didn't get into the house and he would know that his son didn't get into the house, then that means that either him or Deb removed that hard drive. He is lying either way. And there's something in all this that to me is concerning. I don't believe that he had anything to do with what happened to Maddie, but I do believe that perhaps without knowing all the facts, that he jumped in to help his son, believing perhaps that it wasn't as bad as what it actually was, and that now he's realised that he shouldn't have helped his son because it was way worse than what he realised, and he needs to cover up for himself to separate himself from doing that. I could be wrong, I could be misinterpreting, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this. So thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please do subscribe. Also hit the like button, and please do leave a comment below. What are your thoughts about all these consistencies, about the way he was talking about the phone and the hard drive, all these things? What are your thoughts with regards to Chris Stearns? So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.